Welcome to The Advocate, a platform for conversations with those advocating for business in the Charlotte region right now.
Hi, my name is Kelly O'Brien, and I serve as the Chief Advocacy and Strategy Officer at the Charlotte Regional Business Alliance and the president of our foundation. And today I have the distinct pleasure of having a conversation with a member of the Advocacy Committee, Vinay Patel. Vinay is the principal of SREE Hotels and an active member of the Alliance. Vinay, welcome. How are you today?
Thank you, Kelly. I'm doing very well, actually. Looking out at this beautiful Carolina sunshine.
It is a beautiful day. And, Vinay, you are someone who is, again, very influential with the Advocacy Committee, influential with the organization, and influential in our community. So tell us a little bit about how you got into the business of SREE Hotels.
Well, actually, my uncle is one of the co-founders. He founded the company here in Charlotte in 1980. Over the years, we've done about 70 to 80 hotel projects, and we try to keep our portfolio between 20 and 30 because it makes sense on the overhead size. So I moved here from Fiji, 2 years of high school here in Charlotte, college at Chapel Hill, went off to work on the franchisor side for 10 years. So I worked on the other side of the business. And then finally in 2001, my uncle said, it's time to come home. And that was that. So I've been back in Charlotte since 2001. And we, like I said, we franchise primarily with Hilton, Marriott, and IHG.
So, here we sit in 2022. Tell me a little bit about what you've seen over the past couple decades in terms of, booms and busts.
I went out into the market in 1992. Went to the franchisor side. So we were in a downturn for our industry then, pulled ourselves out, then 9/11, then the 2009, and now COVID. Our industry is very cyclical. We're usually on a typical 10-year cycle. We'll rise up for 10 years, we'll hit and come down. And our downs usually aren't as bad as what we are just went through. That just, it felt like, we just fell off a cliff. Even during 9/11 and even during the crisis, it didn't feel as bad as it did this time around because there was no, we didn't know what was going on, right? Had no idea what was going on. So it's been an interesting ride. It's been a fun.
So how did COVID hit, your side of the business?
Well, if you look at where we are, I'll give you a perfect story. We went, there were markets where we were 90% off year over year. Like uptown Charlotte, we went from having, 80-90% occupancy to having zero occupancy. That we had more employees in our buildings than we had guests staying there. So in the peak of things, March, April, May, before the state opened back up again, states started opening back up again. We were, 75, 80, 90% off. There are markets that were still 40 and 50% off right now, where that corporate transient business hasn't come back yet. And then there are markets where it felt like COVID never existed. Right? You go to a Myrtle Beach, and our 2021 was far better than 2019. So COVID hit our industry. If you were a destination, you survived. You did okay. If you're a corporate dominant market, you felt the pain, and you felt the pain very hard.
Now, you mentioned that the company was founded in Charlotte, but in fact, you operate in, is it 3 states?
We do. We're in North Carolina. We have 12 hotels in the greater Charlotte market that sits in the footprint of the Alliance. Then we have 2 in Columbia, 1 in Lumberton. So, that's what we have here in North Carolina. Then we have some down in Columbia, South Carolina, Myrtle Beach. And then we have 4 adaptive reuse historic buildings in downtown Cincinnati.
And how did you pick Cincinnati?
Well, it was our development. Our head of development came up and asked me. There was the old Cincinnati Enquirer building, and they built a new building. This building was in foreclosure, and a lot of people had tried to look at different uses for the building. A broker that we were working with said, "Why don't you just come up and look at it?" So we did. I ran the numbers, and it called for a hotel, and it called for a select serve hotel because the only things in Cincinnati back then were old full service boxes. So we took a 17-story historic building and converted it to two brands, Hampton Inn and Suites and Homewood Suites stacked on top of each other.
Really?
That's how we got into Cincinnati.
Interesting. Well, hearing about your work in the hotel industry, some of our listeners may wonder why I opened by saying that you are a member of the Advocacy Committee. So help us understand why you think it's valuable to be a part of the Advocacy Committee.
I think we have to make sure that our elected officials don't forget about our industry, right? In 2020, I got some statistics here. Before the crisis, we had 20,000 restaurant and food joint establishments, 2,000 lodging establishments, 530,000 jobs in this industry. And that's 11% of the entire employment. And we generated over $3 billion in state and local taxes. And we had to make sure that, we don't just get left behind because we are an important part. And by doing that, we had to be in the forefront. I chaired the governmental affairs for the North Carolina Hotel and Restaurant Association last year, and for 2 years, and then prior to that, I was advocating locally. When all the federal monies were coming into town, we had to ensure that our elected officials, whether they were city or state, didn't forget about our industry. And the biggest accomplishment that we had was last year in the state budget. We got $500 million put into a grants program, 300 of it dedicated to hospitality, and the other 200 to small businesses. That was a huge win. I was in Raleigh starting in February of last year. Probably, I think me and the speaker were on a weekly text basis because we needed to make sure that our elected officials did what they needed to do. So I'll give you a statistic. April of 2020 to November of 2020, hotels, restaurants, and bars lost a little over $4 billion in taxable sales, over 19. That same time period, all other industries in North Carolina were up $7 billion in taxable sales. And that's why our tax coffers were still so good. So we wanted to make sure that our elected officials understood that this industry felt the hurt more, and the federal assistance that came was not proportional to the hurt it felt. And thank God they listened, and then they were able to help out.
Well, thank you for being such a strong advocate for this strong, important sector for our economy. But I've seen you firsthand in Washington, and the federal delegation recognizes you and was, really very complimentary of the relationship that you have. So for the viewers, help us understand what your experience is working with federal elected officials versus state elected officials.
I started on that. First it was with the American Hotel and Lodging Association. It was when I was on the other side, and then when I came to Charlotte, came back home, my uncle told me, if you're not part of the process, you have no question to ask a question, right? You have no right. Senator Tillis has been a friend of mine for a very long time. I held his first fundraiser when he ran for Speaker of the House.
This first fundraiser.
Yeah. Congressman Hudson, again, a very good friend of mine. I've known him since he was, working as a chief of staff. Dan Bishop, same thing. My son actually worked for him when he was running for the North Carolina Senate. So yeah, it's important. It's important to have federal partnerships, federal relationships. I tell people that you should create relationships, local, state, federal level, before you need something, right? When the time comes, when a time of need comes, everybody's in front of them. If that relationship is sent ahead of time and there's a trust, there's a communication back and forth, you'll actually get things done. And that was sort of my mindset of going out there and working at each level of government.
I couldn't agree with you more. And as somebody who has been involved with multiple levels of government and different elected officials throughout many, many years, we're living in very polarized times right now.
Yeah.
How do you see things different? And what do you think we need to do to kind of maybe make things better for, the general public?
I mean, I think you're right. We're polarized, right? And what's sad is that the extreme is who's hurt. Right? I think the majority of our delegations, the majority of our population sits somewhere in between, little left of center, little right of center. But it's the two extremes that are most vocal. And unfortunately, that's what the media hears. And that's news, right? And that's kind of where we are. So I tell people we need to move little to the middle. And at least on the leadership side at each level of government, I think whether it's the mayor of Charlotte, the governor of North Carolina, or the president of the United States, they need to be either a little right of center or a little left of center. You'll have your outliers, but the leadership needs to be in the middle. And that's sort of the messaging that I have when I'm talking to anybody at any level of government.
I think that's right. And so, well, you were able to cite a lot of data in terms of how the industry was impacted over the years, and particularly with COVID. If you were to look at a crystal ball, I mean, I know that there's a lot of uncertainty. We've got, the different factors that are very contradictory with, are we in a recession or aren't we? And how can we have a contracting economy with, so much job growth? So what are you seeing ahead for your industry?
Well, I think we've been pleasantly surprised. I think we've come back a lot quicker than people had thought. And initially we were thinking 23, 24 to see any sort of rebound. But the pent-up demand on the leisure, bleisure group convention meetings has accelerated that comeback. They just had a data conference, and I think they're saying that corporate travel should get back to what it was in 19 by about 25. We're at about 70 or 75% of that level. And the gap is being made up with the leisure and conference business, because everybody, you look at our convention center over the past few months, it's been full because people have been caged, for lack of a better word, not being able to get out in front of people to go and meet. Folks still have to do training. Folks still have to have meetings and conventions so vendors and buyers and sellers can get together. And I think the corporate transient will come back as well. It may be a new normal, but as I tell people, if you have a relationship, you can maintain it on Zoom. You're not creating new relationships on Zoom. And if you're a company, you have to grow. And you grow by doing business face to face. And so we're optimistic. As an industry, I think we're optimistic. The big thing for us is rates has held strong. We've been able to raise rates, so it's making up for the occupancy gap there is. So I still think it'll be, in kind of getting back to 19, it's probably still going to be sometime next year, maybe into 24. But we got here a lot faster than a lot of people expected.
And I do want to talk about workforce, but before we get there, so you're predicting that the kind of business travel won't be back to pre-COVID levels until 2025?
That's what some of the analysts were saying at a data conference, to the levels, right? Because of the new business models that's out there, 3 days in the office, 2 days home. I mean, how does that factor into travel? So, there were folks, and look at consulting companies, right? You left Monday morning or Sunday night and you got home Thursday or Friday, or you stayed the weekend and went on.
Right.
Some of those things aren't happening, and they may not happen for a while. But I think people will realize that, interaction, it worked for the short term that we're in like this. As we move forward, that human interaction, right? You don't feel, you don't sense the emotions over here through a video call. So I think that'll evolve, and we're starting to see it. Right? I mean, I've flown a ton this year. You're starting to see suits on planes. We're starting to see our corporate accounts book across the board. So you're starting to see more and more of that happening.
Excellent. And talk about workforce. I know that everybody's struggling to hire, but I think this industry has been hit particularly hard.
And and there's a couple of reasons, right? I mean, because we were hit hard at the beginning, a lot of people had to lay off a lot of people.
Mhm.
And they kind of left our industry saying, the uncertainty I can't deal with. And they went into a more certain environment. But there's still, we're beyond full employment right now. If you look at the statistics,
That's right.
and industry is growing now. Our industry is growing. Other people are building that's out there. I think as an industry in the past, we just didn't do a good job of promoting the upward mobility opportunities. And that's what's happened. This COVID has really brung that home. So I know the American Hotel and Lodging Association is putting a program together. The North Carolina Hotel and Lodging Association got a $5 million grant in this past round from our state legislature to go out there and do a job promotions program. So our CEO, our president is right now out and about the state, talking to stakeholders about what it is we need, how do we get there, who our target is, and then we'll come up with a campaign to go out there and try to drive workforce back into our industry, because there is opportunity. I can tell you stories over and over again where we've got team members that start off as a housekeeper or a front desk clerk, and in 3 to 5 years are managing their hotel. Because two things that are needed in our industry is a work ethic and an attitude. I don't need an education, right? I can teach you what to do, but I can't teach you to smile, and I can't teach you to want to work. So our industry is one of those that really provides an upward mobility to folks that have a work ethic and an attitude. And so I've been going out. I've been speaking to high schools locally. I've been out at West Mac a couple of times speaking to the kids out there because they have CTE programs, right? And I'm very honest with them. I said, some of you, this is the end of the line from an education perspective. What are you going to do? You may not go to a 2-year technical or a 4-year program. Which industries will you go into that you can have a trajectory opportunity? And this is one of them.
Well, that's fantastic. And you have really provided a great education for all of us today. So Vinay, I want to thank you for all that you do for the Charlotte Regional Business Alliance and the Advocacy Committee, particularly, and for our community. Thank you for championing this industry. And to our audience, thank you for listening today. And please stay tuned for future episodes where we continue to talk to members of the Advocacy Committee, help us understand what's happening in these important economic driver sectors. So with that, I will say, Vinay, thank you, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you, Kelly. All right, bye-bye.
Thanks for tuning in. You can learn more about the Charlotte Regional Business Alliance and its advocacy agenda at charlotteregion.com.